Sarah Mitchell gripped the steering wheel tighter as snow pelted against the windshield of her old sedan. The wipers worked frantically, but they could barely keep up with the heavy snowfall. In the back seat, her twin daughters Emma and Lily hummed softly, their matching pink winter coats creating spots of color in the gray afternoon light. They were only 7 years old, innocent to the danger building around them. The weather forecast that morning had mentioned light snow, nothing concerning. Sarah had planned a simple trip to visit her mother in the next town over, just an hour drive through the mountain pass, but nature had other plans. What started as gentle flurries had transformed into a raging blizzard within 30 minutes. The mountain road, usually visible and well-traveled, had become a white tunnel of swirling chaos. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reduced her speed to barely 15 miles per hour. She could hardly see 10 feet ahead. The radio crackled with static before the emergency broadcast broke through. Severe weather warning. The mountain pass was being closed. All travelers were urged to seek shelter immediately. Her heart sank. They were already deep into the pass, miles from any town or gas station. Behind her, Emma asked in a small voice if they were almost at Grandma's house. Sarah forced a smile into her rearview mirror, trying to keep the fear from her voice. She told them they might need to stop for a little while, that the snow was making it hard to see. Lily pressed her face against the window, watching the white world spin past. She said it looked like they were inside a snow globe. The car suddenly lurched to the right. Sarah's pulse jumped as she felt the tires lose traction. She steered gently into the skid, remembering the winter driving lessons her father had taught her years ago. The vehicle straightened, but her relief lasted only seconds. Through the curtain of snow, she saw the road ahead curve sharply. She pressed the brake pedal carefully, but the car continued sliding forward, barely slowing. Time seemed to stretch as the sedan drifted toward the edge of the road. Sarah could see the guardrail appearing through the white chaos. Then the car bumped over something, metal scraping against the undercarriage. They came to a jarring stop, tilted at an angle. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind howling outside and the twins' frightened breathing. Sarah quickly checked on her daughters. Both girls were secured in their seatbelts, wide-eyed but unhurt. She unbuckled herself and tried to open her door. It wouldn't budge. Snow had already begun piling against the driver's side. She climbed between the front seats and tried the back door on the right side. It opened with effort, revealing that they had slid partially off the road into a shallow ditch. The angle wasn't severe, but the car was stuck, its wheels spinning uselessly when she tried to reverse. The temperature inside the car was already dropping. Sarah kept the engine running to maintain heat, but she watched the gas gauge nervously. They had less than a quarter tank left. She had meant to fill up on the way back, another decision that now seemed foolish. She pulled out her cell phone with shaking fingers. No signal. She tried again, holding it up near the window, moving it around desperately. Nothing but a blank screen where the bars should be. Emma started to cry softly. She was scared and wanted to go home. Lily wrapped her arms around her sister, trying to be brave even though tears welled in her own eyes. Sarah climbed back to sit between them, pulling both girls close. She told them everything would be okay, that someone would find them soon, but inside fear clawed at her chest. This road was not heavily traveled in good weather, and in a blizzard it might be hours or even days before another vehicle came by. She thought about their supplies. In the trunk, she had a small emergency kit her ex-husband had insisted she keep, back when they were still on speaking terms. There were some granola bars, bottled water, a flashlight, and a thin emergency blanket. Not much, but something. She also had the girls' backpacks with a few snacks and juice boxes from their planned visit. The wind shook the car violently, making all three of them jump. Sarah looked out at the wall of white surrounding them. Visibility was nearly zero now. The storm showed no signs of letting up. She made a decision. They would stay in the car for now. It provided shelter from the wind and elements. Going outside in this weather would be suicide, especially with 2 young children. Hours crawled by. Sarah kept the engine running in short intervals to preserve fuel, turning it on until they felt warm, then shutting it off until the cold became unbearable again. She rationed the snacks, giving the girls small portions every hour. They played word games and sang songs to keep spirits up. But as afternoon faded into evening, the situation became more dire. The gas gauge now hovered just above empty. Sarah knew they had maybe 1 more hour of heat at most. She wrapped the emergency blanket around the twins and put extra layers on them from their overnight bag. Outside, darkness was falling, and with it, the temperature plummeted further. Frost began forming on the inside of the windows. Emma asked if Daddy knew where they were. The question pierced Sarah's heart. She and Michael had divorced 2 years ago after a bitter custody battle. He lived 3 states away now and rarely called. The relationship had ended in anger and resentment, with lawyers and accusations flying between them. They barely spoke except through attorneys. He certainly didn't know they were here, trapped and possibly freezing to death. Sarah pushed those dark thoughts away. She needed to stay strong for her daughters. She told them a story about 2 brave princesses who survived a magical winter storm with courage and love. The girls snuggled closer, their small bodies warm against hers. Despite the fear, despite the cold, Sarah felt a fierce determination rise within her. She would protect her children no matter what it took. The fuel gauge finally touched empty. Sarah turned the key one last time, but the engine only coughed before dying completely. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the wind's howl outside. True cold began to seep into the car immediately. Sarah pulled the girls even closer, wrapping her own coat around all 3 of them. They huddled together in the darkness, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Then through the storm's roar, Sarah heard something. A sound that didn't belong to wind or snow. It was distant at first, barely audible. But it grew louder. An engine. A vehicle was approaching on the road above them. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. She fumbled for the flashlight and managed to turn it on. She flashed it toward the window, hoping desperately that someone would see it. The engine sound grew closer, then seemed to stop somewhere nearby. Sarah held her breath. Were they saved? Had someone spotted their car? She heard what might have been a door slamming, muffled by the storm. Then silence again, stretching out impossibly long. She kept flashing the light, her thumb cramping from pressing the button. Suddenly a beam of light swept across their window. A figure appeared outside, moving toward them through the deep snow. Sarah's relief was so intense she felt dizzy. They were saved. Someone had found them. The figure reached the car door and brushed snow away from the window. Sarah raised her flashlight to see their rescuer's face. When she did, her blood ran cold for an entirely different reason. The face staring back at her through the glass belonged to Michael Burke, her ex-husband's older brother and the man she despised more than anyone else in the world. Michael Burke stood outside the car, his tall frame barely visible through the swirling snow. A large German shepherd stood beside him, its dark fur dusted white with snowflakes. Sarah's mind raced with confusion and something close to panic. Of all the people who could have found them, why did it have to be him? The man who had testified against her in court, who had called her an unfit mother, who had tried to take her daughters away. During the custody battle, Michael had been her ex-husband's star witness. He had stood on the stand and told the judge that Sarah was careless, that she prioritized work over her children, that she had emotional problems that made her unstable. His words had been like daggers, each one designed to paint her as a terrible mother. Though she ultimately won primary custody, his testimony had prolonged the battle and drained her savings on legal fees. Michael knocked on the window, his gloved hand thumping against the glass. His voice came through muffled but urgent. He was telling her to open the door. Sarah sat frozen, her arms still wrapped around her daughters. Part of her wanted to refuse, to tell him to go away, to wait for someone else to rescue them. But another part of her, the rational part that knew they were in real danger, understood they had no choice. Emma recognized him immediately. She had always liked Uncle Michael, remembering him from before the divorce when family gatherings were still pleasant. She called out to him excitedly, not understanding the tension. Lily looked confused, glancing between her mother's tight expression and the man at the window. Sarah felt trapped between her pride and her children's safety. Michael tried the door handle from outside and managed to pull it open against the snow. Cold air rushed in like a physical force, making them all gasp. He leaned in, his face red from the wind, ice crystals clinging to his beard. His eyes moved quickly over the 3 of them, assessing. He asked if anyone was hurt. His voice was gruff but not unkind. Sarah shook her head stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. He told them they needed to move fast. His truck was on the road about 50 yards up, but the storm was getting worse. They couldn't stay in the dead car or they would freeze. He extended his hand to help Emma out. The little girl took it eagerly, and he lifted her easily through the door. Lily followed, and then Michael reached for Sarah. She ignored his hand and climbed out on her own, her legs almost giving out in the deep snow. The cold hit her like a hammer. The wind seemed to cut right through her coat, finding every gap and seam. Michael's dog, a beautiful shepherd named Thor, moved closer to the girls as if instinctively protecting them. Michael shouted over the wind that they needed to stay close together and follow him. He took Emma's hand while Sarah grabbed Lily, and they began the difficult trek through the snow toward his truck. The 50 yards felt like 50 miles. The snow came up to the girls' waists, and Sarah had to half-carry Lily while Michael lifted Emma completely. The wind pushed against them with incredible force, trying to knock them down. Sarah's face went numb within seconds. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. She kept her eyes on Michael's broad back ahead of her, using him as a shield against the wind. Thor walked beside them, sometimes in front, breaking a trail through the deepest drifts. The dog seemed to understand the urgency, staying close and alert. Several times when Lily stumbled, Thor pressed against her, helping to keep her upright. Sarah found herself grudgingly grateful for the animal's presence. Finally, a dark shape emerged from the white chaos. Michael's truck, a heavy-duty pickup with oversized tires, sat running on the road. He had left it idling to keep it warm. He pulled open the back door and helped the girls inside first, then gestured for Sarah to follow. She climbed in, her hands so numb she could barely grip the door handle. Thor jumped in last, shaking snow everywhere before settling at the girls' feet. The warmth inside the truck was overwhelming. Sarah's fingers and toes began to burn as feeling returned. The girls were shivering violently, their lips tinged blue. Michael reached back from the driver's seat with a thick blanket and draped it over them. He asked again if everyone was okay, his eyes meeting Sarah's in the rearview mirror. She gave a curt nod, still not ready to actually thank him. Michael put the truck in gear and began carefully navigating back down the mountain road. He explained that the pass had been closed about an hour ago, but he had been coming through from the other direction when they locked the gates. The road crew told him about a vehicle that had gone off the road earlier, and he decided to check if anyone needed help before turning back. Sarah wanted to stay angry at him, to hold on to her resentment, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he had probably saved their lives. If he hadn't come looking, if he had just turned around when the pass closed, they would still be in that freezing car. The thought made her pull her daughters closer. Emma chattered happily with her uncle, telling him about their trip to see Grandma and how the snow had gotten so big. Michael listened patiently, responding to her in a gentle tone Sarah had never heard him use before. It was strange seeing this side of him, so different from the cold, hostile man in the courtroom. The truck moved slowly but steadily down the mountain. Michael clearly knew how to handle the vehicle in severe weather. His movements were confident but careful. Sarah noticed he kept checking the mirrors, making sure they were all okay. Thor rested his large head on Lily's lap, and she petted him absently, her eyes growing heavy. They had been driving for about 20 minutes when Michael spoke without turning around. He said there was a small ranger station about 5 miles ahead. It would be closed for the season, but he had a key from his volunteer work with search and rescue. They could shelter there until the storm passed. Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because he glanced back with a slight humorless smile. He had been volunteering for 3 years now, he explained, helping lost hikers and stranded travelers. This information didn't fit with Sarah's image of Michael as a heartless corporate lawyer who only cared about winning. She struggled to reconcile the man who had destroyed her reputation in court with someone who spent his free time rescuing strangers in the wilderness. Maybe she didn't know him as well as she thought. Or maybe this was just an act. The ranger station appeared through the snow like a small wooden fortress. Michael pulled the truck as close as possible and told them to wait while he checked inside. He took a flashlight and pushed through the snow to the door, Thor bounding alongside him. After a few minutes, lights flickered on inside and he waved them over. Getting the girls from the truck to the cabin was another challenge, but it was shorter and they moved faster, knowing warmth waited. Inside, the station was small but well-equipped. There was a wood stove in the corner, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a sitting area with a couch and chairs. Michael was already building a fire in the stove. Sarah helped the girls out of their wet coats and boots. Their clothes underneath were damp and they were still shivering. Michael opened a closet and pulled out several wool blankets. telling Sarah there were spare clothes in the bedroom if she wanted to get the girls into something dry. His practical efficiency was irritating and helpful at the same time. In the small bedroom, Sarah found sweatpants and sweatshirts that were far too large but clean and warm. She helped Emma and Lily change, rolling up sleeves and pant legs. Their small faces looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes. They had been brave, but the ordeal had taken its toll. When they emerged, the main room had transformed. The fire crackled cheerfully in the stove, throwing warm light across the space. Michael had set out a camping kettle and was heating water. Thor lay by the fire, his fur drying in the heat. Michael had removed his own heavy coat and was checking supplies in the kitchenette. He told them there were instant soup packets, crackers, and canned goods. Not gourmet, but enough to keep them fed until the storm passed. He estimated they would need to wait at least until morning, possibly longer. The storm was supposed to last through the night. Sarah nodded, accepting this information. They had no other choice. As Michael prepared simple soup for them all, Sarah sat on the couch with her daughters between her and the fire. Emma and Lily were already dozing, their heads resting against her. She watched Michael move efficiently around the small kitchen, this man she had hated for 2 years, and felt the first crack in her anger. She still didn't forgive him for what he had said in court. But she couldn't deny that tonight in this storm, he had been exactly what they needed. The smell of chicken soup filled the small ranger station as Michael poured steaming liquid into 4 mismatched mugs. He brought them over carefully, handing the first 2 to Emma and Lily. The girls wrapped their small hands around the warm mugs, their faces brightening at the simple comfort. Sarah accepted hers with a quiet word of thanks that almost caught in her throat. Michael just nodded and returned to get his own. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds coming from the crackling fire and the wind howling outside. Sarah could see the storm through the small window, snow piling against the glass in drifts. They had made it inside just in time. Another hour in that car and the outcome would have been very different. She glanced at Michael sitting in a chair across from them, Thor's head resting on his knee. The dog's loyalty was obvious, the way he stayed close to his owner but kept one eye on the girls. Emma broke the silence by asking Michael about Thor. Her voice was small but curious, the fear from earlier fading now that they were safe and warm. Michael's expression softened as he looked at his dog. He explained that he had rescued Thor 3 years ago from a shelter. The dog had been found abandoned in the mountains, half-starved and scared. Now Thor was trained in search and rescue, helping find lost hikers and avalanche victims. Lily perked up at this, asking if Thor was a hero dog. Michael smiled, a real smile that changed his whole face. He said Thor had saved several lives, that the dog's nose could find people buried under snow or hidden in the wilderness. Emma declared that Thor was the best dog in the whole world. The shepherd's tail wagged at the attention, and both girls giggled when he licked Emma's hand. Sarah watched this interaction with mixed feelings. The girls clearly adored their uncle, and seeing them happy made her heart warm despite her reservations. But she remembered the words he had spoken in court, the way he had made her sound neglectful and unstable. She remembered crying in her lawyer's office after his testimony, feeling like her world was crumbling. How could the man capable of that cruelty be the same person making her daughters laugh? After they finished eating, Michael suggested the girls try to sleep. It was past their bedtime and they needed rest. He pulled out sleeping bags from a storage closet, proper winter ones rated for extreme cold. He laid them out near the fire where it was warmest, creating a cozy nest of blankets and pillows. The girls climbed in gratefully, their eyes already drooping. Sarah tucked them in, kissing their foreheads and smoothing their hair. She whispered that everything was okay now that they were safe. Within minutes, both Emma and Lily had drifted off, their breathing deep and even. Sarah stood watching them for a long moment, overwhelmed with relief and residual fear. They had come so close to disaster. Michael was cleaning up the mugs when Sarah finally turned around. The awkwardness between them was thick enough to cut. They were essentially stuck together until morning at least. 2 people who despised each other trapped in a tiny cabin. Sarah moved to the window, staring out at the white darkness, unsure what to say or do. Michael spoke first, his voice low so as not to wake the girls. He asked if her car was insured, if she would be able to get it towed out once the storm passed. The practical question was easier to handle than emotional ones. Sarah said yes, her insurance would cover it. She would need to call them when her phone had signal again. She checked it now out of habit. Still nothing. Michael said the storm was probably interfering with the cell tower. An uncomfortable silence fell again. Sarah could feel Michael's presence behind her, could sense he wanted to say something more. She braced herself, still looking out the window. When he finally spoke, his words surprised her. He said he was glad he had found them, that he had been worried when he heard about the car off the road. He paused, then added more quietly that he was especially worried when he realized it might be her. Sarah turned to face him, confusion clear on her face. Why would he worry about her specifically? They weren't exactly friends. Michael shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his still damp hair. He looked tired, she noticed, with dark circles under his eyes and new lines around his mouth. He looked older than she remembered from the courtroom. He explained that he kept loose tabs on her and the girls through his brother, not because he wanted to interfere, but because he cared about his nieces. He knew she was planning to visit her mother this weekend because his brother had mentioned it during a brief phone call. When he heard about the vehicle in the past, something told him to check. Sarah didn't know what to say to this. The idea that Michael had been monitoring her life even indirectly felt invasive, but he had also possibly saved them because of it. Sarah finally found her voice and asked the question that had been burning inside her for 2 years. Why had he said those things in court? Why had he testified against her when he knew she loved her daughters more than anything? Why had he tried to help his brother take them away from her? Her voice cracked on the last question, all the pain and anger rushing back. Michael's face went pale. He sat down heavily in the chair, Thor immediately moving to his side. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the fire. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held something she hadn't expected. Regret. He said it was complicated, that he had been caught in an impossible situation. Sarah crossed her arms, waiting. That wasn't good enough. She needed to understand. He began to speak slowly, choosing his words carefully. He explained that his brother had come to him desperate and afraid. Michael's brother claimed that Sarah was falling apart after the divorce, that she was drinking too much and leaving the girls with babysitters constantly. He begged Michael to help him get custody, convinced the girls were in danger. Michael, who barely knew Sarah at that point, believed his brother. Family loyalty made him blind. Sarah felt anger flare up again. She had never been a heavy drinker, and yes, she had needed babysitters because she was a single mother with a full-time job. But she had never neglected her daughters. Never. Michael held up a hand acknowledging this. He said he realized the truth during the custody proceedings. The more he watched, the more he saw how his brother was manipulating the situation. How Sarah's ex was actually the unstable one, using Michael's testimony as a weapon. But by then, Michael explained, he was already committed. He had given his deposition and was scheduled to testify. His brother was counting on him, and Michael felt trapped by loyalty in his own earlier statements. He knew walking back his testimony would destroy his relationship with his brother, so he went through with it, hating himself the entire time. After the trial, when Sarah won custody, he felt relieved but also deeply ashamed. Sarah listened to all this with emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him that his family loyalty had cost her thousands in legal fees and nearly cost her children. But another part recognized the honesty in his confession. He wasn't making excuses exactly, just explaining how things had happened. It didn't erase what he had done, but it provided context she hadn't had before. She asked why he hadn't reached out after, why he hadn't apologized or tried to make things right. Michael shrugged helplessly. What could he say that would make a difference? Sorry for calling you an unfit mother under oath. Sorry for trying to take your children. Words felt inadequate, so he had stayed away, except for volunteering with search and rescue, perhaps trying to balance the scales in his own way by helping strangers instead. Sarah moved to sit on the other end of the couch from the sleeping girls. She felt exhausted suddenly, the adrenaline of the day finally draining away. She told Michael that she didn't know if she could forgive him. What he had done had caused real damage, not just financially but emotionally. She had spent months doubting herself, wondering if she really was a bad mother. His words had cut deep. Michael nodded, accepting this. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted her to know that he had been wrong, that he saw now what he hadn't seen then. Sarah was an excellent mother. The girls were happy, healthy, and clearly adored her. Anyone could see that. He should have looked harder before jumping to conclusions. He should have questioned his brother's story more carefully. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning lower. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The hatred Sarah had carried felt less solid somehow, complicated by understanding even if forgiveness remained out of reach. Michael stood and added more wood to the stove, the flames leaping up bright again. He suggested Sarah try to get some rest, that he would keep watch and make sure the fire stayed going. Sarah was too tired to argue. She lay down on the couch near her daughters, pulling a blanket over herself. Her last image before sleep claimed her was Michael sitting in the chair with Thor at his feet, staring into the fire with an expression of deep sadness. In that moment, he looked less like her enemy and more like a flawed human being carrying his own regrets. Sarah woke to the sound of quiet voices and laughter. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The blizzard, the stranded car, Michael. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the couch. Pale morning light filtered through the window, and the storm seemed to have quieted somewhat, though snow still fell steadily outside. Emma and Lily were sitting at the small table with Michael, eating what looked like instant oatmeal. Thor lay nearby, and both girls were taking turns feeding him small pieces of something from their hands. Michael was showing them how to make Thor do tricks, his voice patient and encouraging. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it took Sarah a moment to process it. Michael noticed her awake and offered coffee. He held up a packet of instant coffee and a kettle of hot water. Sarah nodded gratefully and made her way to the bathroom first, her legs wobbling slightly. When she returned, a steaming mug waited for her on the table. The coffee was weak and bitter, but it was warm and caffeinated, which was all that mattered. Emma immediately started telling her mother about Thor's tricks. The dog could sit, shake, roll over, and even play dead. Lily added that Uncle Michael said Thor could find people in the snow using just his nose. The girls were clearly fascinated by the working dog. Sarah smiled despite herself, watching her daughters' animated faces. At least they would have a positive memory from this ordeal. Michael explained that the storm had lessened during the early morning hours, but was expected to pick up again later. The road crews would need at least a full day after the storm stopped to clear the mountain pass. They should plan on staying at the ranger station through today and possibly into tomorrow. He had checked the supplies, and they had enough food and firewood to last several days if necessary. Sarah felt trapped by the situation. Being stuck here with Michael for potentially another full day or more felt uncomfortable, but she also recognized they had no choice. Going back out into the storm would be dangerous, and her car was buried somewhere back on the mountain. She asked about contacting someone to let people know they were safe. Michael said he had a satellite phone for emergencies in his truck and would get it after breakfast. The morning passed slowly. Michael went out to his truck twice, once to get the satellite phone and again to bring in more supplies. Sarah used the phone to call her mother, who had been frantically worried when they never arrived. She explained what happened, leaving out the detail about who had rescued them. Her mother was just relieved they were safe. Sarah also called her insurance company to report the car situation, though they couldn't send anyone until the roads cleared. Emma and Lily played with Thor, who seemed to have infinite patience for the two energetic girls. They threw a small ball for him in the limited space, and he retrieved it dutifully each time. Michael watched from the side, occasionally giving commands that Thor obeyed instantly. Sarah could see the bond between man and dog, the trust and communication that went beyond words. Around midday, Sarah found herself alone with Michael while the girls napped again, exhausted from playing. The awkwardness returned, that heavy silence that filled the space between them. Sarah decided to break it by asking about his search and rescue work. It was a safe topic, neutral ground. Michael seemed surprised by her interest, but willing to talk. He explained that he had started volunteering after the custody trial. He needed something to take his mind off the guilt and the fractured relationship with his family. A friend suggested search and rescue training, and Michael discovered he had a talent for it. The work was hard, often dangerous, but it gave him purpose. He had been on dozens of rescues over the past 3 years, helping lost hikers, injured, climbers, and people caught in sudden storms like Sarah had been. Sarah asked about Thor's training. Michael's face lit up when talking about his dog. He explained the months of intensive training, how Thor had learned to detect human scent under feet of snow, how the dog could work in extreme conditions without hesitation. Thor had personally found 4 people buried in avalanches, 3 of whom survived because of how quickly the dog located them. There was pride in Michael's voice, but also deep affection. Without thinking, Sarah mentioned that the girls would love to have a dog. She immediately regretted saying it, feeling like she was revealing too much about their life. But Michael just nodded thoughtfully. He said Emma had mentioned wanting a puppy during breakfast. Sarah admitted she had been considering it but worried about the responsibility on top of everything else she was managing. Single parenting was hard enough without adding a pet to the mix. Michael surprised her by saying she was doing an amazing job. He had watched her with the girls, seen how attentive and loving she was, how the twins clearly felt secure and happy. It took real strength to rebuild a life after divorce while keeping children's world stable. His voice was sincere, without any trace of the judgment she had heard in the courtroom. Sarah didn't know how to respond, so she just looked down at her coffee mug. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Michael asked about her work, and Sarah found herself talking about her job as a graphic designer. She had started freelancing after the divorce to have more flexible hours with the girls. It was challenging, financially, but it allowed her to be present for school pickups and activities. Michael listened without interrupting, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. Sarah, in turn, learned that Michael had left his high-pressure law firm last year to work as a consultant. The corporate world had been burning him out, making him into someone he didn't like. Now he had more control over his schedule, and could spend time on things that mattered like search and rescue work. It was less money, but more peace. Sarah understood that feeling more than she would have expected. They talked about the girls, finding common ground in their shared affection for Emma and Lily. Michael admitted he had missed them terribly over the past 2 years. He had stayed away because he thought his presence would upset Sarah, but he regretted missing so much of their lives. They were growing so fast. Sarah felt her anger soften a bit more. She could hear the genuine loss in his voice. The afternoon brought more snow, the wind picking up again. Michael kept the fire going strong, and they went through more of the ranger station supplies. Dinner was canned stew heated on the camp stove, served with crackers. The girls thought it was an adventure, camping inside during a storm. Their innocence and resilience amazed Sarah. They had been scared yesterday, but now they were treating it like a game. After dinner, Michael taught the girls to play cards. Simple games like Go Fish and War that they could understand. Sarah watched from the couch, her body finally relaxing after being tense for so long. She noticed little things about Michael she had never seen before. The way he let the girls win without being obvious about it. How he listened to their chatter with genuine interest. The gentle way he corrected Thor without harshness. He seemed like a good man, which confused everything she thought she knew about him. As evening fell, Michael built the fire back up and pulled out a book from his pack. He asked if the girls would like a story. Both Emma and Lily crowded around him eagerly. He read to them from a book of folk tales, doing different voices for different characters. The girls laughed and asked questions, completely engaged. Sarah found herself listening too, lulled by the sound of his voice and the warmth of the fire. When the story ended, the girls begged for another. Michael obliged, reading 2 more before declaring it was bedtime. He helped Sarah get them settled, in their sleeping bags, both girls hugging him goodnight without hesitation. Sarah tucked them in and kissed their foreheads, her heart full despite the strange circumstances. Once the girls were asleep, Sarah and Michael sat on opposite ends of the couch. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the wind had quieted to a gentle whisper. Sarah realized they had made it through a full day together without any major conflict. More surprisingly, there had been moments when she almost forgot to be angry at him. Michael broke the silence by apologizing again. But this time it was different, more specific. He apologized for not being brave enough to tell the truth in court, for choosing his brother's approval over what was right. He said he had replayed that testimony 1,000 times in his head, wishing he could go back and do it differently. The regret in his voice was raw and real. Sarah considered his words carefully. She told him that while she appreciated the apology, what hurt most wasn't just the testimony itself. It was that he had made her doubt herself as a mother. Those words from someone who barely knew her had somehow carried more weight than her own knowledge of how much she loved and cared for her children. That kind of damage took a long time to heal. Michael listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving her face. He said he understood, and that he knew an apology couldn't undo that harm. But he wanted her to know that every word he had spoken in court was wrong. She wasn't careless or unstable or any of the things he had claimed. If anything, she was one of the strongest people he had ever encountered. To rebuild a life, raise 2 children alone, and still keep them happy and secure required an incredible amount of strength and love. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the window. Actual sunlight instead of the gray gloom of the past 2 days. She sat up quickly, disoriented by the change. The storm had finally passed during the night. Through the window she could see blue sky and the mountain landscape transformed into a brilliant white wonderland. The world looked clean and new, like a fresh start. Michael was already awake, standing at the window with a mug of coffee. He turned when he heard her move and smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. He told her the storm had cleared around dawn. He had already used the satellite phone to check with the road crews. They were starting to plow the mountain pass and expected to have it open by late afternoon. They would be able to leave today. Sarah felt a complicated mix of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. She was eager to get home, to return to normal life, but there was also a strange reluctance to leave this small cabin where so much had changed. The girls were still sleeping, curled together in their sleeping bags with Thor stretched out beside them. The dog had appointed himself their guardian and barely left their side. After Sarah had her coffee, Michael suggested they take a short walk outside while the girls slept. The sun was warm despite the cold, and the fresh air would do them good after being cooped up. Sarah agreed, and they bundled up in their coats. Michael left the door slightly open so they could hear if the girls woke up. Thor stayed inside, clearly taking his babysitting duties seriously. The world outside was breathtaking. Snow covered everything in smooth drifts and curves, unmarked except by animal tracks. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun made the snow sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. Sarah took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air, feeling something release in her chest. They had made it through. They were safe. They walked a short distance from the cabin, staying within sight of the door. The snow was deep, but the sun had already begun to soften the top layer. Michael pointed out different tracks in the snow, identifying them. Deer had passed nearby. A rabbit had hopped past. A fox had circled the cabin during the night. Sarah listened, surprised by his knowledge of wilderness tracking. She asked how he knew so much about animals and nature. Michael explained that search and rescue training included wilderness survival and tracking skills. You had to understand the environment to work in it safely, but beyond that, he had always loved the outdoors. As a kid, he had spent summers camping with his grandparents. Those had been his happiest memories, away from his parents' loud arguments and his father's drinking. This revelation surprised Sarah. She had known Michael's brother. Her ex-husband came from a troubled home, but she had never connected that Michael shared the same background. He had always seemed so confident and put together in court. Learning about his difficult childhood made him more human, more understandable. Hurt people sometimes hurt people, even unintentionally. Michael asked about Sarah's family, and she found herself opening up in a way she rarely did. She talked about her own parents' divorce when she was young, how her mother had struggled as a single parent. That experience had made Sarah determined to provide stability for her own children, which was why the custody battle had been so devastating. She had fought so hard to avoid putting Emma and Lily through the kind of chaos she remembered from her childhood. Understanding passed between them in the cold morning air. They both carried wounds from their pasts, both trying to do better than what they had experienced. The custody battle had put them on opposite sides, but underneath they weren't so different. Both wanted what was best for the girls. They had just disagreed on what that meant. Or rather, Michael had been misled about what that meant. They stood looking out at the mountains, the peaks sharp against the blue sky. Michael said something that surprised Sarah. He told her that his brother, her ex-husband, had struggled with alcohol and anger issues since they were teenagers. Michael had always protected him, covered for him, made excuses. The custody battle had been more of the same. Michael trying to save his brother instead of seeing the truth. He had failed everyone by choosing blind loyalty over honest judgment. Sarah appreciated this honesty more than she could express. It confirmed what she had known but others had denied. Her ex-husband had problems that had nothing to do with her. Problems that had made their marriage impossible. Hearing Michael acknowledge this lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined the difficulties. Someone from his own family was finally admitting the truth. Michael added that he had confronted his brother after the trial, telling him that he would never testify for him again, and that he needed to get help. The confrontation had fractured their relationship, and they barely spoke now. Michael had chosen truth over loyalty, but it had come too late. Sarah felt sympathy for him despite everything. He had lost his brother in the aftermath of hurting her. Everyone had paid a price for those courtroom lies. They walked back toward the cabin, their footsteps crunching in the snow. As they approached, they heard the girls' voices inside, awake and calling for them. Michael held the door open for Sarah, and they entered together to find Emma and Lily playing with Thor, both girls giggling as the dog gently play-wrestled with them. The scene was so full of joy and normalcy that both adults paused to take it in. Breakfast was the last of the instant oatmeal and some granola bars Michael had in his truck. The girls chattered about going home, about telling their friends at school about their adventure in the storm. They wanted to know if Thor could visit them sometime. Michael glanced at Sarah, uncertain, and she nodded slightly. He told the girls that maybe Thor could come for a visit once they got settled back home. After breakfast, Michael went outside to check on his truck and confirm the road status. He came back with good news. The plows were making excellent progress. They should be able to leave within a few hours. He would drive them all down the mountain to Sarah's mother's house, and they could figure out the car situation from there. Sarah thanked him, and this time the words came easily. The hours until departure were spent cleaning up the cabin and repacking their few belongings. Michael made sure the fire was completely out and the cabin was secure. Sarah helped the girls fold the sleeping bags and put away the dishes they had used. It felt strange to be leaving this place that had been their shelter and sanctuary, the place where enemies had become something else. Finally, it was time to go. Michael loaded everyone into his truck, Thor jumping into the back with the girls who squealed with delight. The drive down the mountain was slow but steady, the plowed roads revealing just how much snow had fallen. In some places, the drifts were over 6 feet high on either side of the road. Sarah shuddered thinking about what could have happened if they had been stuck longer in her car. They passed the spot where her sedan had gone off the road. Michael slowed down so Sarah could see it. The car was almost completely buried in snow, just a small section of the roof visible. A tow truck was already there, working to dig it out. Sarah made a mental note to follow up with them later, but right now she just wanted to get the girls to safety and warmth. The descent continued without incident. Emma and Lily sang songs with Thor howling along, making everyone laugh. The tension that had defined Sarah and Michael's relationship for so long had transformed into something tentative but hopeful. They weren't friends yet, maybe would never be, but they weren't enemies anymore either. The storm had forced them together and in doing so had shown them truths they both needed to see. As they reached lower elevations, cell phone signal returned. Sarah's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from worried friends and family. She sent quick texts assuring everyone they were fine. Michael's phone also came to life, and she could hear him dealing with his own concerned contacts. They were returning to the real world, leaving the isolated bubble of the ranger station behind. When they finally pulled up to Sarah's mother's house, the older woman rushed out before they even parked. She pulled Sarah and the girls into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. She had been so worried, imagining the worst. The girls hugged their grandmother back, assuring her they were fine, telling her about Uncle Michael and Thor and the adventure in the storm. Sarah's mother looked at Michael with surprise and confusion. Sarah quietly explained that he had rescued them, that they had weathered the storm together at a ranger station. Her mother's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to gratitude. She thanked Michael profusely, insisting he come inside for a proper meal. Michael declined politely, saying he needed to get back to his own place and let his search and rescue coordinator know he was safe. But before he left, Emma and Lily ran to him for goodbye hugs. He knelt down and embraced them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. He told them to be good for their mom and grandma, and that he hoped to see them again soon. The girls made him promise to bring Thor for a visit. He looked at Sarah over their heads and she nodded. He promised. Sarah walked him back to his truck, leaving the girls with her mother. They stood in the cold afternoon air, two people who had been through something extraordinary together. Sarah extended her hand and Michael shook it. Then 6 months had transformed everything. Sarah stood in her backyard watching Emma and Lily play with their new puppy, a golden retriever mix named Sunny that Michael had helped them adopt from a rescue organization. The dog was young and energetic, constantly tripping over her own paws, but perfect for the girls. Thor had helped train Sunny during several joint visits, the older dog teaching the puppy basic commands and proper behavior. The summer sun was warm, a stark contrast to the blizzard that now felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Sarah's business had grown enough that she was considering hiring an assistant. The financial stress that had been crushing her for years had eased significantly. She felt like she could finally breathe, like her life was moving in a positive direction rather than just surviving crisis after crisis. Michael had become a regular presence in their lives, visiting every other weekend and attending the girls' events as promised. He had been at Emma's family day, Lily's soccer games, both their birthday parties last month. The girls adored him, and Sarah had come to value his friendship more than she ever thought possible. He was reliable, thoughtful, and genuinely invested in the girls' well-being. Sarah's mother often joined them for weekend gatherings, and she and Michael had developed their own friendship. They shared stories about the girls, laughed at their antics, and worked together to provide the children with a stable, loving extended family. It was everything Sarah had wanted when she first got divorced, a support system that functioned with love rather than obligation or resentment. The ex-husband situation had not improved. He had essentially disappeared from the girls' lives, sending occasional cards but rarely calling or visiting. Sarah had stopped making excuses for him. When the girls asked, she told them age-appropriate truth that their father loved them, but was dealing with his own problems. Michael never badmouthed his brother, but he made sure the girls knew their father's absence was not their fault. This particular Saturday was special. Michael was bringing someone to meet them. He had mentioned on the phone that he had started dating someone, a woman named Rachel who worked as an emergency room nurse. He wanted to introduce her to the family if Sarah was comfortable with it. Sarah had encouraged the meeting, genuinely happy that Michael was finding his own happiness. When Michael's truck pulled up, a woman climbed out of the passenger side. Rachel was tall with curly dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her smile warm and genuine. She looked nervous but excited, holding a container of what appeared to be homemade brownies. Thor jumped out behind her, and Sunny immediately bounded over for an enthusiastic greeting between the two dogs. Sarah greeted them at the door, introducing herself to Rachel. The woman had kind eyes and a firm handshake. She thanked Sarah for inviting her, explaining that she had heard so much about the girls and was excited to finally meet them. Emma and Lily came running, initially shy but quickly warming up when Rachel asked about Sunny and admired the puppy's tricks. The afternoon was filled with easy conversation and laughter. Rachel fit seamlessly into their gathering, asking thoughtful questions and sharing funny stories from her work at the hospital. She was clearly intelligent and compassionate, and Sarah could see why Michael cared for her. More importantly, she was natural with the girls, engaging without trying too hard, letting them come to her at their own pace. Over hamburgers grilled by Michael and salad prepared by Sarah and Rachel, the conversation turned to the blizzard story. The girls loved telling people about their adventure, though their version had become somewhat dramatized over the months. Rachel listened with wide eyes, occasionally glancing at Michael with new understanding. She said she had known he did search and rescue, but hadn't realized he had saved his own family members. Michael caught Sarah's eye across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. They both knew the blizzard had saved them in a way, forcing them together and making them confront truths they might have otherwise avoided forever. That storm had been the best and worst thing to happen to them, a catalyst for change that neither had wanted but both had needed. After lunch, the adults sat on the patio while the girls played with both dogs in the yard. Rachel asked Sarah about her design work, showing genuine interest in her portfolio. They discovered shared interests in art and photography, Rachel mentioned she did nature photography as a hobby, and Sarah invited her to join a local photography club she had recently joined. The easy friendship forming between them felt natural and right. Michael watched this interaction with visible relief and happiness. Sarah realized he had been worried about how she and Rachel would get along, whether introducing a new person to this carefully rebuilt family dynamic would cause problems. She made a point of catching his eye and smiling reassuringly. She was genuinely happy for him, for them. He deserved this. As afternoon faded toward evening, Emma made an announcement. She had drawn a picture of their whole family and wanted to show everyone. She ran inside and returned with a large piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. There was Sarah in the middle with Emma and Lily on either side. Grandma stood nearby, and there was Michael with Thor and Rachel beside him and Sunny at their feet. A complete family portrait. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the innocence and completeness of the drawing. This was how Emma saw their family now. All these people who loved and supported them. The drawing showed no absence of the girl's father, no empty spaces or sad faces. It showed joy and fullness, a family unit that worked even if it didn't look traditional. Rachel wiped at her own eyes, clearly moved by being included. Michael's face showed a mix of emotions that Sarah understood completely. Gratitude, happiness, a sense of belonging that had probably been missing from his life. He thanked Emma solemnly and asked if he could keep the picture. Emma agreed, but insisted on making copies so everyone could have one. Lily immediately wanted to draw her own version. As the sun began to set, Rachel and Michael prepared to leave. The girls hugged them both goodbye, with Emma making Michael promise to bring Rachel to her school play next month. Rachel readily agreed, charmed by the invitation. Sarah walked them to the truck, Sunny and Thor following as an escort. Michael thanked Sarah for welcoming Rachel so warmly. Sarah told him honestly that Rachel seemed wonderful, and that she was happy he had found someone. He deserved happiness after everything. Rachel gave Sarah an impulsive hug, thanking her for the lovely day and for raising such amazing girls. Sarah hugged her back, feeling like she was gaining another friend, another person in their expanding circle of support. After they left, Sarah and the girls went inside to start their evening routine. Bath time, story time, bedtime, the familiar rhythms of single motherhood that Sarah had learned to navigate and even enjoy. As she tucked the girls into bed, Emma asked if Uncle Michael was going to marry Rachel. Sarah said she didn't know, but maybe someday. Lily asked if that would make Rachel their aunt. Sarah said yes, it would. The girls seemed pleased by this possibility, already making plans for the wedding they were sure would happen. Sarah smiled at their innocent enthusiasm and kissed them goodnight. In their room, illuminated by the nightlight, she could see Emma's family portrait taped to the wall. All those smiling figures drawn with love and certainty. Downstairs, Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the porch with Sunny at her feet. The evening was peaceful, fireflies beginning to appear in the twilight. She thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day in the blizzard, how fear and desperation had forced her to accept help from someone she considered an enemy, how that acceptance had opened doors she hadn't known were closed. She thought about forgiveness and second chances, about how people were complex and capable of growth. Michael had made terrible mistakes, had hurt her deeply, but he had also owned those mistakes and worked to make amends. He had shown her through consistent action that he was trustworthy, that his apology had been genuine. That kind of transformation deserved recognition. Sarah also recognized her own growth. She had learned to separate her ex-husband's failures from Michael's choices. She had learned to let go of anger that was poisoning her more than it hurt anyone else. She had learned to accept help and build community, rather than trying to handle everything alone. The blizzard had taught her that sometimes the person you least expect can become exactly who you need. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. A simple message thanking her again for today, and including a photo he had taken. It showed Sarah, the girls, Rachel, both dogs, all laughing at something Sunny had done. The joy in the image was unmistakable, the sense of family and belonging clear in every face. Sarah sent back a heart emoji and a message saying she was grateful for their renewed friendship. She meant it completely. The relationship they had now was built on honesty and hard-won understanding, rather than blind loyalty or false pleasantries. It was stronger for having been broken and repaired, like bones that healed thicker at the break. Their relationship had a resilience it never would have had without the fracture. 6 months had transformed everything. Sarah stood in her backyard watching Emma and Lily play with their new puppy, a golden retriever mix named Sunny, that Michael had helped them adopt from a rescue organization. The dog was young and energetic, constantly tripping over her own paws, but perfect for the girls. Thor had helped train Sunny during several joint visits, the older dog teaching the puppy basic commands and proper behavior. The summer sun was warm, a stark contrast to the blizzard that now felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Sarah's business had grown enough that she was considering hiring an assistant. The financial stress that had been crushing her for years had eased significantly. She felt like she could finally breathe, like her life was moving in a positive direction rather than just surviving crisis after crisis. Michael had become a regular presence in their lives, visiting every other weekend and attending the girls' events as promised. He had been at Emma's family day, Lily's soccer games, both their birthday parties last month. The girls adored him, and Sarah had come to value his friendship more than she ever thought possible. He was reliable, thoughtful, and genuinely invested in the girls' well-being. Sarah's mother often joined them for weekend gatherings, and she and Michael had developed their own friendship. They shared stories about the girls, laughed at their antics, and worked together to provide the children with a stable, loving extended family. It was everything Sarah had wanted when she first got divorced, a support system that functioned with love rather than obligation or resentment. The ex-husband situation had not improved. He had essentially disappeared from the girls' lives, sending occasional cards but rarely calling or visiting. Sarah had stopped making excuses for him. When the girls asked, she told them age-appropriate truths that their father loved them but was dealing with his own problems. Michael never badmouthed his brother, but he made sure the girls knew their father's absence was not their fault. This particular Saturday was special. Michael was bringing someone to meet them. He had mentioned on the phone that he had started dating someone, a woman named Rachel who worked as an emergency room nurse. He wanted to introduce her to the family if Sarah was comfortable with it. Sarah had encouraged the meeting, genuinely happy that Michael was finding his own happiness. When Michael's truck pulled up, a woman climbed out of the passenger side. Rachel was tall with curly dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her smile warm and genuine. She looked nervous but excited, holding a container of what appeared to be homemade brownies. Thor jumped out behind her and Sunny immediately bounded over for an enthusiastic greeting between the two dogs. Sarah greeted them at the door, introducing herself to Rachel. The woman had kind eyes and a firm handshake. She thanked Sarah for inviting her, explaining that she had heard so much about the girls and was excited to finally meet them. Emma and Lily came running, initially shy but quickly warming up when Rachel asked about Sunny and admired the puppy's tricks. The afternoon was filled with easy conversation and laughter. Rachel fit seamlessly into their gathering, asking thoughtful questions and sharing funny stories from her work at the hospital. She was clearly intelligent and compassionate, and Sarah could see why Michael cared for her. More importantly, she was natural with the girls, engaging without trying too hard, letting them come to her at their own pace. Over hamburgers grilled by Michael and salad prepared by Sarah and Rachel, the conversation turned to the blizzard story. The girls loved telling people about their adventure, though their version had become somewhat dramatized over the months. Rachel listened with wide eyes, occasionally glancing at Michael with new understanding. She said she had known he did search and rescue but hadn't realized he had saved his own family members. Michael caught Sarah's eye across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. They both knew the blizzard had saved them in a way, forcing them together and making them confront truths they might have otherwise avoided forever. That storm had been the best and worst thing to happen to them, a catalyst for change that neither had wanted but both had needed. After lunch, the adults sat on the patio while the girls played with both dogs in the yard. Rachel asked Sarah about her design work, showing genuine interest in her portfolio. They discovered shared interests in art and photography. Rachel mentioned she did nature photography as a hobby, and Sarah invited her to join a local photography club she had recently joined. The easy friendship forming between them felt natural and right. Michael watched this interaction with visible relief and happiness. Sarah realized he had been worried about how she and Rachel would get along, whether introducing a new person to this carefully rebuilt family dynamic would cause problems. She made a point of catching his eye and smiling reassuringly. She was genuinely happy for him, for them. He deserved this. As afternoon faded toward evening, Emma made an announcement. She had drawn a picture of their whole family and wanted to show everyone. She ran inside and returned with a large piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. There was Sarah in the middle with Emma and Lily on either side. Grandma stood nearby, and there was Michael with Thor and Rachel beside him and Sonny at their feet. A complete family portrait. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the innocence and completeness of the drawing. This was how Emma saw their family now. All these people who loved and supported them. The drawing showed no absence of the girl's father, no empty spaces or sad faces. It showed joy and fullness, a family unit that worked even if it didn't look traditional. Rachel wiped at her own eyes, clearly moved by being included. Michael's face showed a mix of emotions that Sarah understood completely. Gratitude, happiness, a sense of belonging that had probably been missing from his life. He thanked Emma solemnly and asked if he could keep the picture. Emma agreed, but insisted on making copies so everyone could have one. Lily immediately wanted to draw her own version. As the sun began to set, Rachel and Michael prepared to leave. The girls hugged them both goodbye, with Emma making Michael promise to bring Rachel to her school play next month. Rachel readily agreed, charmed by the invitation. Sarah walked them to the truck, Sonny and Thor following as an escort. Michael thanked Sarah for welcoming Rachel so warmly. Sarah told him honestly that Rachel seemed wonderful, and that she was happy he had found someone. He deserved happiness after everything. Rachel gave Sarah an impulsive hug, thanking her for the lovely day and for raising such amazing girls. Sarah hugged her back, feeling like she was gaining another friend, another person in their expanding circle of support. After they left, Sarah and the girls went inside to start their evening routine. Bath time, story time, bedtime, the familiar rhythms of single motherhood that Sarah had learned to navigate and even enjoy. As she tucked the girls into bed, Emma asked if Uncle Michael was going to marry Rachel. Sarah said she didn't know, but maybe someday. Lily asked if that would make Rachel their aunt. Sarah said yes, it would. The girls seemed pleased by this possibility, already making plans for the wedding they were sure would happen. Sarah smiled at their innocent enthusiasm and kissed them goodnight. In their room, illuminated by the nightlight, she could see Emma's family portrait taped to the wall. All those smiling figures drawn with love and certainty. Downstairs, Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the porch with Sonny at her feet. The evening was peaceful, fireflies beginning to appear in the twilight. She thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day in the blizzard. How fear and desperation had forced her to accept help from someone she considered an enemy. How that acceptance had opened doors she hadn't known were closed. She thought about forgiveness and second chances, about how people were complex and capable of growth. Eichel had made terrible mistakes, had hurt her deeply, but he had also owned those mistakes and worked to make amends. He had shown her through consistent action that he was trustworthy, that his apology had been genuine. That kind of transformation deserved recognition. Sarah also recognized her own growth. She had learned to separate her ex-husband's failures from Michael's choices. She had learned to let go of anger that was poisoning her more than it hurt anyone else. She had learned to accept help and build community rather than trying to handle everything alone. The blizzard had taught her that sometimes the person you least expect can become exactly who you need. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. A simple message thanking her again for today and including a photo he had taken. It showed Sarah, the girls, Rachel, both dogs, all laughing at something Sonny had done. The joy in the image was unmistakable, the sense of family and belonging clear in every face. Sarah sent back a heart emoji and a message saying she was grateful for their renewed friendship. She meant it completely. The relationship they had now was built on honesty and hard-won understanding, rather than blind loyalty or false pleasantries. It was stronger for having been broken and repaired. Like bones that healed thicker at the break, their relationship had a resilience it never would have had without the fracture. Sonny rolled over for a belly rub, and Sarah obliged, scratching the soft fur while the puppy wiggled with joy. Above, stars were beginning to appear in the eye.